Pete Hegseth from Fox and Friends Weekend joins us, Army veteran who served in Afghanistan and Gitmo. This is intensely personal to him. Pete, we also understand we're in a conflict. We might pretend we're out, but now we have the 82nd Airborne coming in. We have 8,000. Right now there's about 3,500, about 8,000. And the Taliban have decided not to let anyone in the airport. We got media on the outside, let alone the people on the outside of Kabul. How does this play out?
Anyone knows, anyone's guess. It's a disaster, but it was entirely predictable. I mean that earnestly. When I was in Afghanistan, I was the senior counterinsurgency instructor at our counterinsurgency academy. That was 10 years ago. My job was to study the Taliban, was to study the insurgency, was to study what they were trying to do in the population. The writing was on the wall in 2011 and 2012, even before that, that the only legitimate entity, and not good entity, I don't mean good, I mean, legitimate entity in Afghanistan was the Taliban. They had justice systems. They had provided security. They saw the Afghan government as corrupt, as incapable. The Afghan military was not going to fight unless it was paid and supported by the U.S. military. Our commanders knew that. Anyone who spent time with members of the Afghan army and police knows some of them are okay. Almost all of them are illiterate. And all of them are terrified that if the Taliban takes over, what's their next move? It was a house of cards 10 years ago, and we poured billions into the Afghan army and still to the very end sold this idea that they were going to fight and stand up to the Taliban, a motivated force who has the support of the population in the rural areas and the ruthlessness with which to control them. This is all predictable. There have been successful tactical retreats in the past. This is a disaster. It started with getting rid of the Bagram Air Base, which was securable. You can use that to get people out in addition to what you have in Kabul. So it is really demoralizing to see. But what's more demoralizing is the utter failure of our Defense Department and intelligence agencies to understand the nature of the enemy, and that we created an Afghan army from a country that didn't exist. There is no Afghanistan. The Tajiks, the Pashtuns, the others, all in different areas don't relate to each other. It's tribalism to its core. You can't create a central government and central military that stands up for that. It's a fool's errand, unfortunately.
Well, we heard very clearly from the commander-in-chief yesterday. He said, you know, the buck stops here, but don't blame me. We didn't know exactly where Kamala Harris was with this adventure, and she tweeted this out. For 2 decades, our courageous service members put their lives on the line in Afghanistan. We will always be grateful and proud. Ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan is the right decision, she said. And Joe Biden yesterday said, you know, I am bound by Donald Trump's timeline. He put this in place. But when we look at, and I couldn't undo that. Unlike every other policy of Donald Trump that Joe Biden has tried to undo in the last 7 months.
He's bound by nothing. If he wanted to take a different approach, he could. I actually agree that it's time to end our time in Afghanistan, but a couple thousand troops here or there at Bagram or elsewhere to maintain a counterterrorism mission is a pretty easy investment considering what we've done, moving away from nation building, which was never going to work because there was nothing to build. And I say that with great respect for the Afghan people, for Afghan girls who have a chance to go to school, otherwise never would. I understand the stakes of what the Taliban are going to do to people, ruthlessly taking them back centuries in application. At the same time, so the nation building project was doomed to fail. Have a counterterrorism mission. We're going to need it because this is going to be a breeding ground for terrorism, unfortunately.
We lost it.
You just had we of course we did, but we never won it. That's the problem, Brian. Having been there wasn't anything to win.
We lost the counter-terror mission.
We could have a small footprint to do that, but frankly, after the Navy SEALs killed bin Laden, that was about our mission was complete there. And we kept trying to build a national army that didn't exist, and we knew it. And that's an intelligence DOD failure. And now we have thousands, tens of thousands of weapons, heavy weapons that will fall into the hands of the Taliban, helicopters, vehicles. And it's because we built something we knew couldn't last. And it looked good on paper in some Pentagon PowerPoint briefing. It said, oh, look, the Afghan army has 300,000 troops. And we believed it to the end, when we should have known without our support and without payment, the Taliban would the more motivated and legitimate force would carry the day. And that's why the Hamid Karzai airport is surrounded, and we've got troops now in harm's way trying to defend people, evacuate, and others who can't get there. The amount of texts I've gotten from people who I know, who know people there that are trying to get to that airport, but they can't get past the Taliban checkpoints because the Taliban controls the city. We should have seen it. There should have at least been a corridor from the embassy to the airport. It was all tactical retreats are a military operation. They can be done. It's been bungled. Somebody should be fired. Whether it's the Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, somebody's head should roll for this because the lack of planning is staggering. And now we're watching Saigon, worse than Saigon, with people being evacuated from the embassy and the airport.
Yeah, many are comparing it to Saigon, Bay of Pigs. Here's Leon Panetta. Listen to this.
You know, in many ways, I think of John Kennedy and the Bay of Pigs. You know, it unfolded quickly, and the president thought that everything would be fine, and that was not the case. But President Kennedy took responsibility for what took place, and I strongly recommend to President Biden that he take responsibility, admit the mistakes that were made.
He was the former defense secretary under Obama. How do you think we could have done this better? You mentioned earlier, you touched on it a little bit, leave a few thousand there, maybe. How could we have prevented this from happening?
Well, but, you know, Brian's right. There are power projection platforms and bases there that we could have held on to. Who knows if in perpetuity, if the Taliban controls the entire country and decides to start shelling a base where we've got I mean, there's many different problems that come with any one of those scenarios. But ultimately, you know, JFK was a brand new president trying to stare down, look tough, take on the communists when the Bay of Pigs happened. This is ultimately Joe Biden's supposed to be the experienced one, the seasoned one, the one who was going to get us out the right way. Donald Trump was doing it wrong. He's going to do it right. You know what? It was Gates, Secretary Gates, who was right when he said, you know, Biden's been wrong on everything, every major foreign. Joe Biden doesn't understand the situation in Afghanistan, hasn't. Unless you walk the ground, work with Afghans, you don't understand how backwards it is. And as a result, you can fall for the briefings of your military leaders and others who say that everything's going to be okay. That happened here. And God bless every American, everyone I served with, all the people over 20 years that made an investment in this country. This is not on you. This is not on the people that fought and gave everything. This is on policymakers who made prisoner swaps and who made deals with the Taliban and surged but didn't really surge. There were so many things that were done in a half-baked way in Afghanistan. That's how you end in the situation we're in.
So there's a couple of things going on. Number one, the men and women like you who fought there did an incredible job. The intelligence were able to garner what we were able to understand about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and their affiliates because we were there, were able to interact on the ground, not just see from satellites, is indefinable and is going to be benefit us for a while. But another inaccuracy on President Biden's speech yesterday is saying that's the old war on terror. It's moved on. He went to Yemen, where he already pulled our intelligence out of. They're back there in 21 of 24 provinces. Al-Qaeda is present. If you hold on to that base and allow us to work at that base with drones and other things, we would have been effective. Now we find out that that big swap in 2014, that we got Bo Bergdahl back, the disgraced deserter who has just embarrassed this country on many levels. One of the guys that came back from there, Karul Karawka, he is now running things. He's at the palace in Afghanistan. He was affiliated with bin Laden, worked for him. He actually was one of the people instilling the punishments for the Taliban. He's back in power. He was let out in the Taliban 5 under President Obama. Isn't that in your face?
Absolutely, Brian. How fundamentally unserious we have been in the conduct of this war almost from the beginning. And that doesn't take away from what the guys and gals have done on the ground. What I'm talking about is we had Guantanamo Bay. I was there when there were 600 detainees there, including this now commander of the Taliban. If we had had a real system, we would have tried them, found them guilty of the war crimes they've existed, and executed our enemies from that prison through a military tribunal process, because we understood the nature of radical Islamists, that they were going to continue to keep fighting. Instead, we traded a traitor who abandoned his unit for 5 of the worst outside the protocols. The Pentagon said, do not release these guys. Do not release them. They are a danger in the future. Just like Baghdadi, who we released, by the way, from a prison in Iraq, became the leader of ISIS. In this case, now we have one of the leaders of the Taliban came from Guantanamo Bay.
We knew this would happen, didn't we?
Of course we did. They said it would happen. And we counted the number of people who went back to fight with the enemy.
Right.
Islamists and this threat are not quitting. We can quit them. They won't quit. The calculation we have to make is, with an ascendant communist Chinese, how much do we invest in trying to build infrastructure and nation build in countries in the Middle East with no infrastructure at all, like Afghanistan, versus small counterterrorism measures seriously executed, like not releasing Gitmo prisoners and killing people who deserve to be killed, while then staring down the communist Chinese. It's a resource issue. Empires fall when they try to do too much in too many places. That's happened to us in Afghanistan. Scale back. Realize this threat isn't going away. Otherwise, Brian, to your point, we will get another 9/11.
Sure.
Because we're going to turn our backs and they're not going to stop.
And so, Pete, as we look at the image of the guy you actually guarded at Gitmo, he's now one of the Taliban leaders. The Taliban is what they're trying to do now. You know, people were terrified as soon as they get to town, they're going to just start killing people left and right. They haven't done that in a widespread way, but they're trying to show that they are responsible leaders and the world should trust us. And they're saying, hey, we would love to have women join the movement and things like that. Has the Taliban actually turned over a new leaf, or is this just spin?
Oh, give it time, Steve. Give it time.
Yeah.
That's good old-fashioned Taliban propaganda. Of course. What they have is a legitimacy advantage and a legitimacy problem. Their legitimacy advantage was that the Afghan government was so corrupt and so incapable that when they rolled in, they could prove, hey, I can solve your land dispute that otherwise someone else with a different ethnic background will take a bribe and then not resolve for you. I'll resolve it swiftly.
Sure.
We talked about it very directly. Legitimacy was important. Their legitimacy problem will be now they're going to become more heavy-handed. They've shown that. Of course, they're not going to treat women respectfully. Of course, they're going to have the brutal executions they've had in the past. Of course, they're going to kill anyone that worked with Americans. And they're going to overplay their hand with the more western side of Kabul, which is a very small part, but there is a part of that in Kabul. But that's not what they're worried about. What they're worried about is the mass of people in Afghanistan are ultimately observed religious Muslims who may not like the Taliban, but recognize they may be more effective in their everyday lives than the corrupt, failed central government of the Afghan government that we created or the Afghan military. So it's a bad choice. No one wants to choose the Taliban. A lot of people will by default because they have to. Ask the Russians, ask us after 20 years. They are a resolute bunch who believe that. The other thing we've missed in our intelligence, they believe the Quran. They believe the inevitability of Islam's ascendancy. They're dedicated to it in a way that you can't pay an Afghan soldier to otherwise think. That's the fanaticism was an advantage for them we barely ever accounted for when it came to our Defense Department.
Well, Pete, just 5 weeks ago, Joe Biden said he doesn't trust the Taliban and said that was a silly question to the reporter, you remember. But now the White House is saying they're willing to transfer power to the Taliban with conditions. If they uphold rights, they don't harbor terrorists, and they protect the rights of women and girls. Is that a smart move?
What conditions? What conditions? What conditions are they going to honor? We left. And we left with our tail between our legs. We left looking like fools. We left looking weak, unfortunately. And I don't like saying any of those words. But we're on the way out. We're setting conditions. According to whom? It's not going to happen. And so ultimately, the Taliban will be exactly who they are. The question is, Brian, and this is, I think, an open question. How willing are they to openly work with al-Qaeda, knowing that connection with al-Qaeda and ISIS would be the nexus by which we would go in and start killing Taliban senior leaders?
I can answer for you.
We want that. We don't want to get tangled in that.
I can answer for you.
We'll see.
One of the conditions that Mike Pompeo talked about is you have to openly divorce yourself from al-Qaeda, and they wouldn't. They wouldn't say it.
Yes.
They would jump around. They would not say it. And we understand that they're side by side right now, and more are going to flood into Kabul to celebrate this big victory over the world superpower, the United States of America. We also understand this. Maybe if you go back to Afghanistan, you might remember him. Golan Rouhani is another ex-Gitmo guy who's among the command and control of the Taliban. He got out of Gitmo. You know why? He told the State Department he's a shopkeeper. His dad was sick, and he worked with Americans. So that was able to get him out. So fantastic. Number two, I think it's important to point out, Admiral Kirby has just said on another network that he's working to get everybody out with American visas. I'm not sure I would feel good about that because there are 80,000 applications. 80,000 applications. The people in Kabul can't move. Can you imagine if you in Kandahar or Herat? What are you possibly going to do?
It's not happening. It's not happening. They're not. You can't get to the airport. You can't get through the checkpoints. And our soldiers and others that are paratroopers that are there are meant to secure the evacuation at the airport. They're not going to push out into Taliban country at this point. This is a policy that we are stuck with because of the lack of planning that existed throughout that entire process. As far as Al Qaeda is concerned, you're right. In the negotiations, they have said we're not going to work with. They've said both sides of their mouth. They won't disown them. We won't work with them. We know exactly what they're willing. They're fellow Islamists. They are Islamists. Whether or not the Taliban seeks to strike us at home remains to be seen, but they will make the marriages they need to maintain their power. And you're right, they're flooding into that capital city. It's going to be ruthless and it's going to be brutal. And I think our evacuation efforts are going to be meager compared to what they're. Why would we believe what Kirby's telling us right now? Why would we believe what Austin's telling us right now? Why would we believe what any of these folks are telling us right now about what they're going to do in Afghanistan after the disaster that unfolded on their watch? Don't buy it. What they've been selling us for 20 years didn't work.
Well, you know, because the images are so bad, Pete, you know, the White House and the State Department is in damage control mode. The Secretary of State Blinken yesterday got on the phone and called the United Kingdom, China, India, Pakistan, Russia, Turkey, just to because they had to explain, hey, listen, you know, apparently this is why we did it, but he didn't have a good answer.
Here's another lie of the Afghan war, that we were part of a coalition. I had a patch on my shoulder called the International Stability Assistance Force, ISAF. You know what we called it? I saw Americans fighting. Okay, there were 50 flags at the embassy. There were 50 flags at the airport of countries that were supposed to be a part of this coalition. Do you know how many of them fought? One. Okay, the United States of America. Sure, the Brits had some good troops. I worked with some good British troops. I worked with some good Australian troops who I worked with. The Canadians really wanted to do more, but their politicians held them back. The French wanted to do more, but their politicians held them back. Ultimately, it's not about the troops from those countries. It's the political caveats that their assemblies sent them with, which meant they couldn't actually go out and fight. So we're a part of a coalition where every other member of the coalition can't fight except for us. And now we're calling them and asking for their help or explaining something to them. They weren't there for us. They were falsely there with their flag, but they weren't investing. It was an American boys out there alongside Afghans who can't read, who can't write, who can't count, trying to give them a country. And ultimately, they did the best they could. It's time to leave. We shouldn't have left this way. What a disaster from the Biden administration.
For 20,
but I don't know what else
20
to say.
years, for people watching, for 20 years, there hasn't been a major attack at our homeland. Not close. Because, I would argue, because of the work done over there. Not because Afghanistan became this great democracy, but because we kept an eye on the people that hate, plot, and plan most. As technology advanced, the plots would have been easier to execute. It would have been much easier, since think about what's happened over the last 20 years with digital technology. But now we're not seeing that. That has a lot to do with the men and women doing over there. Nothing to do with Karzai or Ghani. It had to do with the counter-terror operations guys like you did. And now they have to stop in their tracks. And now they're going to look at massive refugees heading into Western Europe, I don't know, like 2 years ago when it happened in Syria.
Yep. We got massive refugees heading into our southern border as well. Where are the politicians with courage saying you're not coming? It doesn't exist because we're led by globalist leaders who can't even enforce their own borders. Why would we think they're going to win wars? Why would we think they're going to execute ruthlessly against the enemy? We could have done that, Brian, and not try to build a false Afghan national army for the last 20 years in a nation building exercise. So I think it's a bit of a false choice. But God bless the people who invested there the way they could with the limitations they had, and it is saddening to watch what's happening. I pray for the people there.
Me
I pray
too.
for them.
Think about those 19-year-old girls who have never known what the Taliban really looks like, and they're about to find out. It's heartbreaking.
People jumping from wheel wells of airplanes trying to get out of that country.
And their work for the 50,000 Afghans that did fight with our support, they did believe.
Hey, Pete, thank you very much.
They did.
thank you very much for joining us. So it looks like you're at Camp David, but I know you are in the middle
Camp
of a
Hegseth.
family vacation.
That's right.
10 feet away from where Pete is an RV, and it's heading west.
And it's starting to shake because the kids are waking up. I can see it right here. My wife, Jen, is right there. We're waking up here in Indiana at a beautiful campground of America.
Well, now you can write it off, at least
KOA.
today,
That's
since you worked.
All right.
Thanks so
KOA.
much.
Can't
Tell the
beat it.
family hey.
Thanks, guys.